They came for her at dawn, and she didn't fight. Winter Ashford had stopped fighting the moment she realized dying might be easier than explaining why her husband's body was found with her bloody handprints on it. But when the vampire king saw what was hidden beneath her sleeves, everything changed. Winter sat in the holding cell beneath the council hall in Portland, Oregon, her wrists bruised from the iron shackles they'd clamped on her 3 days ago. She didn't cry anymore. Tears required hope, and hope required the belief that someone might actually listen. The council had already made their decision. Human woman, dead husband, blood evidence, case closed. She traced the faded scar on her left forearm, the one shaped like a cigarette burn, and almost laughed. They were going to execute her for finally escaping him. Across town, in the shadows of the Pearl District, Cain stepped out of a black SUV, his white hair catching the early morning light like a halo on the devil himself. He'd ruled the Western Territories for 3 centuries, and his name alone made vampires go silent and humans cross themselves. He hadn't planned to attend some small-town execution, but the council had been making moves lately, getting bold, forgetting who actually ran things. Someone needed reminding. His second-in-command, a nervous vampire named Torres, walked 2 steps behind. "My king, the execution is scheduled for 8. It's just a human matter, a domestic murder. We don't need to." Cain turned, one eyebrow raised, a smile playing at his lips that didn't reach his ice-blue eyes. "Did I ask for your opinion, or did I ask for the car to be ready?" Torres went pale. "The car is ready, my king." "Brilliant. I do love efficiency." Cain's voice was smooth, almost friendly, which somehow made it worse. He adjusted the cuff of his custom Tom Ford suit, black on black, because if you're going to crash an execution, you might as well look spectacular doing it. He'd been bored lately, restless. Something in his chest had been pulling him toward Portland for weeks, an instinct he'd learned centuries ago not to ignore.
Winter heard the footsteps before she saw them. 3 council members, all vampires, old ones who still clung to the ancient laws like they meant something. The tall one, Gregor, unlocked her cell with a smile that made her skin crawl. "Time to go, little widow." She stood on shaking legs, her oversized gray sweatshirt hanging off her thin frame. She'd lost 15 pounds in 3 days. Grief, they'd call it. Trauma, maybe. She called it relief, and that's what would get her killed. You weren't supposed to be relieved when your husband died, even when he'd spent 5 years making sure you knew exactly how worthless you were. Cain's SUV pulled up to the council hall just as they were leading Winter out. He stepped out slowly, deliberately, and the morning seemed to hold its breath. 2 council guards stood at the entrance, and they both took an involuntary step back. Good. Fear was honest. "Gentlemen," Cain said pleasantly, "lovely morning for a killing, isn't it?" Inside, Winter was being led to the execution chamber, a cold stone room that smelled like iron and old death. She barely registered it. Her mind was somewhere else, back in that last night, Derek's hands around her throat, her vision going black, the lamp she'd grabbed in desperation, the crack of skull, the sudden silence. "Self-defense," her mind whispered. "Murder," the law answered. She didn't know that 50 feet away, a white-haired king was about to rewrite her entire story. And neither of them knew that the regret they'd each carried, his for never saving the ones who mattered, hers for never believing she was worth saving, was about to collide in the most brutal and beautiful way possible. The execution chamber doors burst open, and Gregor looked up annoyed. "This is a closed council proceeding. You can't just—" He stopped mid-sentence because Cain was already inside, hands in his pockets, smiling like he'd just walked into his own birthday party. Torres followed, looking like he wanted to disappear into the walls. "Oh, please, continue," Cain said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Don't let me interrupt the part where you pretend to have authority." Gregor's face went red. "King Cain, with all due respect, this is council business. A human killed her husband. Our laws are clear." "Your laws." Cain's smile widened, but his eyes went cold as winter steel. "I love that. As if you write laws in my territory without my name on them." He walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, his white hair flowing behind him like a ghost. "But you're right. I should respect council business. In fact, let me help."
In a movement too fast for human eyes, Cain grabbed Gregor by the throat and lifted him off the ground. The other 2 council members reached for weapons, but Cain's free hand raised in a stopping gesture, almost polite. If you're still here, your heart's already in this story, just like mine is. Don't leave Winter hanging, and don't leave me wondering. Hit that subscribe button and join this Vampire Love Stories community, because we're just getting started, and what happens next is going to make you scream.
Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I genuinely want to know where my story family is. And here's something to think about. If you were Winter, would you even want to be saved at this point, or would you think it's too late? Tell me below. Gentlemen, please, let's not be rude. I'm having a conversation with your friend here. He turned his attention back to Gregor, whose feet were dangling 2 feet off the ground. Tell me, Gregor, when exactly did the council start executing people in my city without sending me an invitation? Was it lost in the mail? Because I'm very particular about my mail. Gregor choked, clawing at Caine's iron grip. We didn't think. Minor human matter. Minor human matter, Caine repeated thoughtfully. Then he laughed, actually laughed, and the sound echoed off the stone walls like breaking glass. You didn't think a murder investigation warranted the king's attention? How wonderfully efficient of you. His grip tightened. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to meet this killer. And if I find out you rushed this execution because you were lazy or corrupt or just phenomenally stupid, I'm going to come back and finish this conversation. Do we understand each other? He dropped Gregor, who crumbled to the floor, gasping. Caine stepped over him like he was furniture, adjusting his suit jacket. Apologies for the mess. I get passionate about due process. That's when he saw her. Winter stood against the far wall, shackled to a post, her gray sweatshirt torn at the shoulder from where they dragged her. Her dark hair hung in tangles around a face that might have been beautiful if it wasn't hollow with exhaustion. But it was her eyes that caught him first, deep brown and entirely empty, like someone had scooped out everything that made her alive and left just the shell. She looked at him without fear. That was the first thing that struck him. Everyone feared him. It was his brand. But this woman looked at him like he was just another monster in a long line of monsters, and she'd stopped being surprised by them years ago.
So you're the husband killer, Caine said, walking toward her slowly. His voice had lost its mocking edge, replaced by something curious. You don't look like a murderer. Neither do you, Winter said quietly. But I bet you are. The room went silent. Torres actually gasped. No one talked to Caine like that. No one. Caine stopped 3 feet from her, his head tilted, a genuine smile crossing his face. Oh, I like you. What's your name? Does it matter? You're going to kill me either way. Maybe, maybe not. Humor me. Winter Ashford. Winter, he repeated, tasting the name. Did you kill your husband, Winter? She met his eyes dead on. Yes. Why? Because he was going to kill me first, and I got tired of letting him try. The honesty of it hit like a slap. Caine's expression shifted, something dangerous moving behind his eyes. Show me your arms. Winter blinked, the first crack in her empty facade. What? Your arms. Show me. It wasn't a request. She hesitated, then slowly pushed up her left sleeve with shaking hands. The scars were everywhere. Burn marks, perfectly round cigarette circles going up her forearm like a grotesque constellation. Long, thin lines where something sharp had traced her skin. Bruises in various stages of healing, yellow and purple and green. Caine went absolutely still. Winter pushed up the other sleeve. More of the same. Years of the same. A roadmap of torture written on skin that should have been cherished. Her voice came out flat, rehearsed. He said I needed to be taught lessons, that I was slow to learn, that a good wife doesn't make her husband repeat himself. Caine's hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, slowly curled into fists. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle, which was somehow more terrifying than his earlier violence. How long? 5 years. And the council knew.
He asked. I reported it twice. They said it was a domestic matter, human business, not their concern unless a vampire was involved. Winter's laugh was bitter. Funny how it became their concern the second Derek was dead. Caine turned slowly to face Gregor, who was still on the floor. The Vampire King's face was calm, perfectly calm, except for his eyes, which had gone completely black. You knew. You all knew, and you did nothing. And now you are going to execute her for saving her own life. Gregor scrambled backward. The law states... The law, Caine interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper that filled the entire room, states that anyone under my protection answers to me first. And I'm feeling very protective right now. He looked at the 3 council members like a cat looking at mice. Here's your choices, gentlemen. You can run, and I'll make it sporting. Or you can stay, and I'll make it educational. Either way, you're going to understand why you don't ignore suffering in my territory. He moved toward them, and Winter watched as the 3 ancient vampires, creatures who'd lived for centuries, ran like children from the monster they'd forgotten was real. Caine let them go, for now. Then he turned back to Winter, and his face transformed again.
the rage replaced by something softer, more human. He knelt in front of her, eye level, and his voice when he spoke was nothing like the weapon he'd used moments before. "No one is going to hurt you again. Do you understand me? No one." Winter stared at him, and for the first time in 3 days, tears filled her eyes. "Why do you care?" Cain reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched the shackles on her wrists. They fell open like they were made of paper. "Because a long time ago, I didn't save someone who needed it, and I've regretted it every day since. I don't make the same mistake twice." Winter's legs gave out, and she started to fall. Cain caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. "I've got you," he whispered. "I've got you now." And Winter Ashford, who'd stopped believing in rescue, who'd accepted her death as inevitable, broke apart in the arms of a vampire king, and finally let herself cry.
Winter woke in the back of Cain's SUV with a wool coat over her knees and the smell of leather, rain, and his expensive cologne around her. For one terrifying second, she thought she was back in Derek's truck, being driven home to another apology that would end in bruises. She jerked away. Cain didn't touch her. He only sat across from her, white hair loose over his shoulders, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. "I'm not your prisoner," she said, voice shaking. "No," he replied softly. "You're my guest." "That's what men say before they lock the door." His jaw tightened, but he smiled without humor. "Darling, if I wanted you locked up, Portland would hear the screams of everyone who tried to open the cage." She swallowed hard. "Don't call me darling." "Noted." His phone buzzed. Torres read the message and went pale. "My king, the council has declared her guilty by blood debt. They're sending enforcers." Cain looked out the window and laughed under his breath. "How thoughtful. I was hoping breakfast would come to me." Winter stared at him. "Why are you doing this?" For the first time, his smile faded. "Because nobody came for my sister when she begged," he said. "And I have spent 200 years making sure the descendants of those responsible remembered her name." Winter pulled the coat tighter around herself. "I'm not your sister." "No," Cain whispered, eyes locked on hers. "You're the woman they tried to bury while she was still breathing."
Cain brought her to his estate on the outskirts of Portland, a sprawling Victorian mansion that looked like it had witnessed centuries. Winter stood in the marble foyer, still wearing her stained sweatshirt, feeling like a ghost haunting someone else's life. "You'll stay here until this is resolved," Cain said, already typing something on his phone. "I don't need charity." "Good, I don't give it." He looked up, eyes sharp. "What you need is protection. What I need is to make sure the council understands what happens when they overstep. We're using each other. Very transactional." A woman appeared from the hallway, older, human, with kind eyes. "This is Mrs. Chen. She runs the house. She'll show you to a room." Winter followed Mrs. Chen upstairs, but stopped at the landing. "Why do you have a human working for you?" Cain's voice drifted up, amused. "Because she makes better coffee than any vampire I've met, and she's not afraid to tell me when I'm being an ass. Rare qualities." Mrs. Chen smiled. "He's dramatic, but he's decent. You're safe here, honey." The room she was given was larger than her entire apartment had been. A 4-poster bed, windows overlooking gardens, a bathroom with a tub deep enough to drown in. Winter locked the door, slid down against it, and finally let herself fall apart. Downstairs, Cain poured himself a drink he didn't need and stared at his phone. Torres entered cautiously. "The enforcers will be here by nightfall. Let them come." "My king, perhaps we should negotiate." Cain's glass shattered against the wall. "Negotiate? They tortured that woman through inaction. They knew what was happening and called it domestic. Then they rushed her execution to cover their incompetence." His voice dropped to something deadly. "I'm not negotiating. I'm educating." Torres knew better than to argue. Upstairs, Winter ran a bath, the first one in 3 days. She peeled off her clothes and caught sight of herself in the mirror. The scars looked worse in good lighting. She looked worse. Hollow cheeks, dead eyes, a body that had forgotten what safety felt like.
She sank into the water and tried to remember the last time someone had helped her without wanting something in return. She came up empty. Hours later, there was a soft knock. Winter had changed into clothes Mrs. Chen left for her, simple black leggings and an oversized sweater that actually fit. She opened the door to find Cain standing there with a tray. "Mrs. Chen insisted you eat. I'm apparently the delivery service now." Winter stared at the food. Soup, bread, fruit, real food. Her stomach growled traitorously. "I'm not hungry." "You're a terrible liar." He set the tray on the table near the window. "Eat or don't, but if you faint from hunger, I'll take it personally." She almost smiled. Almost. Cain turned to leave, then stopped. "The enforcers are coming tonight. Stay in this room. Don't come downstairs no matter what you hear. Can you do that?" "Why?" His smile was all teeth. "Because I'm about to have a very loud conversation about respect, and it's going to get messy." Winter's heart raced. "You're going to kill them?" "Only if they insist. I'm hoping they insist." He said it like he was hoping for good weather. "Lock the door behind me." She did, and then she sat by the window, the soup growing cold in her hands, waiting for the screams she knew were coming, and hating herself for hoping he'd win. The screams lasted 7 minutes. Winter counted every second, her hands pressed against her ears, curled in the corner of the room farthest from the door. When silence finally came, it was somehow worse. Then footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. She held her breath. The footsteps passed her door and continued down the hall. A door opened and closed, water running, a shower. 20 minutes later, another knock. Cain stood there in fresh clothes, his white hair still damp, not a drop of blood visible anywhere. He looked like he'd been reading a book, not dismantling council enforcers. "They're gone," he said simply. "Dead?" "3 are. 2 are delivering a message back to the council." His smile was cold. "I'm a firm believer in eyewitness testimony." Winter should have been horrified, should have been disgusted. Instead, all she felt was a twisted sense of relief that someone was finally fighting for her.
"You look disturbed," Cain observed. "I'm not," she whispered. "That's what disturbs me." Something shifted in his expression. He stepped into the room, uninvited but somehow not threatening. "May I tell you a story?" She nodded. Cain sat on the edge of the chair by the window, moonlight catching his features. "I had a sister, younger. Human, actually. My father married twice, once to a vampire, once to a human he loved more. Celeste was the result. Beautiful, kind, everything I wasn't." Winter sat on the bed, listening. "She married a merchant in 1823, in Boston. Nice man, everyone said. Respected, wealthy." His voice went hollow. 6 months in, she sent me a letter. Just one line. "Brother, I'm frightened. Please come." Winter's chest tightened. "I was in Europe, building alliances, playing politics, being important." He said the word like poison. "I wrote back that I'd visit in spring, that whatever it was could wait 3 months. His hands curled into fists. I found her body 2 months later, beaten to death in her own kitchen. Her husband said she fell down the stairs. The magistrate believed him because he donated to the church. Cain's eyes went black. I kill him slowly. Took 3 days. Then I killed the magistrate. Then I killed everyone who knew and did nothing." "Good," Winter said quietly. He looked at her, surprised. "I'm sorry about your sister, but I'm not sorry about what you did after." Cain studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time. "You understand. I understand that some people don't deserve mercy." Winter's voice cracked. "Derek proposed to me at a Starbucks in downtown Portland, made this whole public scene, got down on one knee, everyone clapping. I said yes because saying no in front of all those people felt impossible."
She pulled her sleeves down over her hands. "The first time he hit me was on our honeymoon. I burned his eggs. He apologized after, cried, said he'd had a bad childhood, that he loved me too much, that it made him crazy." She laughed bitterly. "I believed him. For 5 years, I believed every apology." "What changed?" Cain asked softly. "He started talking about having kids." Winter's eyes filled with tears, "And I realized I'd rather die than bring a child into that house. So that last night, when his hands went around my throat, I fought back, really fought back. I grabbed the lamp and I hit him, and I kept hitting until he stopped moving. She met Caine's eyes. I'm not sorry either. The room fell silent, except for the sound of her breathing. Caine stood slowly and crossed to where she sat. He knelt in front of her, this ancient king, this killer, and took her scarred hands in his. You survived.
You survived, he said. That makes you stronger than any warrior I've ever commanded. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't feeling fearless. It's being terrified and doing it anyway. His thumbs traced gentle circles on her wrists. You saved yourself when no one else would. That's everything. Winter looked down at their joined hands, his pale against her scarred skin, and something inside her chest cracked open. Why does this feel like the first time anyone's actually seen me? Caine's voice dropped to a whisper. Because it probably is. She didn't pull away when he stood and pressed a kiss to her forehead, soft as snow falling. Get some rest. Tomorrow we end this properly. After he left, Winter lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her hands still warm from his touch, wondering when the monster became the first person to make her feel human again.
3 days passed. The council went quiet, which Caine said was more dangerous than noise. But inside the mansion, something unexpected was happening. The walls between them were coming down, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the small, quiet ways that matter more than grand gestures. It started with breakfast. Winter came downstairs the second morning expecting to eat alone. Instead, she found Caine at the kitchen island, sleeves rolled up, white hair pulled back, arguing with a waffle iron like it had personally offended him. It's not working, he announced without turning around. You've been alive for 3 centuries and you can't make waffles? I've been alive for 3 centuries and never needed to. Mrs. Chen is visiting her daughter in Seattle this week. He turned, holding the waffle iron like evidence at a crime scene. This machine is broken. It's not broken. You have to wait for the light to go green. He stared at it. That is absurdly simple. Most things are when you actually wait. He looked at her then, catching the double meaning, and something warm moved across his face. Sit down, Winter. I'll attempt not to poison you.
She sat at the kitchen island and watched this terrifying ancient king wrestle with a waffle iron, muttering in what sounded like Old French whenever it didn't cooperate. When he finally slid a plate in front of her, the waffles were slightly burnt on one side and perfectly golden on the other. They're asymmetrical, he said, sitting across from her with his coffee. They're perfect, she replied, and took a bite. Do vampires drink coffee? I drink it for the ritual, the warmth, the smell. He wrapped both hands around his mug. 300 years and some habits just become part of you. Winter ate in comfortable silence for a moment. What was it like 300 years ago? Caine leaned back, eyes going somewhere far away. Loud. Smelled terrible. People died of things that a good antibiotic would fix today. He smiled. But there was a simplicity. You knew who your enemies were. You could see them coming. Now? Now enemies wear suits and call themselves council members and file paperwork while women are being tortured. His voice darkened briefly, then lightened again. I much preferred swords. Winter laughed. Actually laughed, and the sound surprised them both. Caine's expression shifted into something unguarded, something almost reverent, like he was watching something rare and delicate come back to life. You should do that more, he said quietly. What? Laugh. It suits you considerably better than that empty look you came in with. Winter looked down at her plate. I forgot how, for a while. I know the feeling. His voice was softer now. After my sister, I stopped laughing for 40 years. 40 years of nothing but rage and revenge and cold purpose. What brought it back? He was quiet for a moment. A child in Rome, 1867. I was there to settle a score, 3 generations deep. The grandson of the magistrate who'd covered for Celeste's husband had risen to political power. I was going to destroy everything he'd built. He shook his head, almost smiling. But this little boy, maybe 6 years old, dropped his gelato on my boot, stood there looking up at me with these enormous, terrified eyes, ready to cry. And instead of crying, he said, in the most serious voice I've ever heard, Sir, I believe your shoe is now strawberry flavored. Winter burst out laughing again. I laughed for the first time in 4 decades over a 6-year-old's gelato disaster. Cain grinned. I bought him 2 more scoops. Then I went and destroyed the magistrate's grandson anyway, but I was in a considerably better mood about it. You're terrible, Winter said, still laughing.
Magnificently so, he agreed. That afternoon, they sat in the library. Cain read something ancient and leather-bound. Winter curled in the chair across from him with a novel she'd found on the shelf, a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice with margin notes written in old ink. "Are these your notes?" she asked. I knew Austen personally. Brilliant, sharp, deeply funny woman. She'd have had no patience for Derek. His eyes didn't leave his book. She'd have written him as the villain he was and given him a humiliating ending in Chapter 3. Winter stared at the margin notes with new eyes. Later, she fell asleep in the chair. When she woke, there was a blanket over her she didn't put there, and Cain was still reading, pretending not to notice that he'd covered her. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Do what?" His eyes stayed on the page. She smiled and pulled the blanket tighter. "Thank you." That evening, they walked the mansion gardens, Portland's autumn air sharp and clean around them. Cain walked beside her, close enough that their arms occasionally brushed, neither pulling away. "Can I ask you something personal?" Winter said. "You can ask. I reserve the right to ignore it entirely. Have you ever loved someone? Like, truly loved them?" Cain was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she thought he was exercising his ignoring rights. "Once," he finally said. "A very long time ago. She was human. She chose safety over the chaos of loving me, and I can't honestly say she was wrong. Do you regret it?" He glanced at her sideways. "I regret that I gave her so many reasons to leave before I gave her a single reason to stay." Winter absorbed that quietly. They walked a little further, and without thinking, her hand found his. He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, and for a fraction of a second, this ancient, feared, brutal king looked completely undone. He didn't pull away. "For what it's worth," Winter said quietly, "the chaos doesn't scare me. I survived 5 years of a different kind. Yours at least comes with waffles." Cain laughed, really laughed, and it rolled across the garden like thunder wrapped in silk. "Winter Ashford," he murmured, squeezing her hand gently. "You are the most unexpected thing that has happened to me in 3 centuries." She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder as they walked, just for a moment, just enough. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something terrible to happen. She felt like something wonderful already had.
It came on a Tuesday, the way the worst things always do. Quietly, without warning. Dressed in ordinary clothes so you don't see it coming until it's already inside. Winter was in the library when she heard the voice. Female, sharp, confident. The kind of voice that owned every room it entered. She set down her book and moved to the top of the staircase, staying in the shadows the way she'd learned to do in Derek's house. Make yourself small. Don't be seen until you understand what you're walking into. The woman standing in the foyer was stunning. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in a deep burgundy coat that probably cost more than Winter's car. She stood with the ease of someone who had walked into this mansion 100 times before. "Cain," she said warmly, reaching up to touch his face. "I've missed you terribly." Cain caught her hand, not unkindly, and lowered it. "Vivian, I didn't know you were coming." "The council sent me." Her smile didn't waver. "As a liaison. They want to negotiate. Apparently you made quite an impression on their enforcers." "Only 3 survived. I was being generous." Vivian laughed, rich and practiced, always so dramatic. Her eyes swept the room. "Where is she? The human woman you've decided to play guardian for?" Something in Winter's chest went cold. Play guardian. "That's not your concern," Cain said. "Actually, it is. The council's position is that the woman committed blood debt murder. They're willing to drop the execution if she leaves Portland permanently and severs all connection to vampire society." Vivian tilted her head. "Meaning she leaves your protection. Tonight." Winter gripped the railing. "That's not a negotiation," Cain said, his voice dropping. "That's an ultimatum. Call it what you like. The alternative is war between you and the full council. And Cain, even you can't fight all 12 seats simultaneously." Vivian stepped closer to him. "Is she really worth that? A human woman you've known for barely 2 weeks? Cain said nothing. And that silence lasted 3 seconds too long. Winter walked down the stairs before she could stop herself. Both heads turned. Vivian assessed her with the cool efficiency of someone appraising something they found unremarkable.
"You must be the widow," Vivian said pleasantly. "And you must be the messenger," Winter replied, keeping her voice steady. Vivian smiled. "Smart. I like that." She turned back to Cain. "You have until midnight. Think carefully about what you're protecting and why." She glanced at Winter one more time, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're guilty. But feelings don't change facts, and facts don't care about feelings." She left. The foyer felt emptied out after her. Cain stood with his back to Winter, one hand pressed against the wall, his white hair falling forward over his shoulders. "Say something," Winter said. "Give me a moment." "No," her voice cracked. "Is she right? Are you going to hand me over to keep the peace?" Cain turned. His face was conflicted in a way she'd never seen before, and that conflict terrified her more than his anger ever could. "It's not that simple." "It never is." Winter's laugh was hollow. "Derek used to say that too. It's complicated, Winter. You don't understand the full picture, Winter." She shook her head. "I thought you were different." "I am different." "Then say it. Say you're not sending me away. Say it and mean it." Cain ran a hand through his white hair, jaw tight. "If I go to war with the full council, people die. My people. Vampires who have been loyal to me for centuries. So I'm the sacrifice to prevent that. I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Winter stepped back, something shutting down behind her eyes, the emptiness returning, that hollow look he'd spent 2 weeks carefully chasing away. "I've been a burden my whole life. I shouldn't be surprised that it follows me here." "You are not a burden. Don't." Her voice broke. "Don't say kind things while you're deciding to abandon me. It's crueler than just being honest." Cain crossed the room in 2 strides and took her face in his hands, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. "I am not abandoning you." "Then what are you doing?" "I'm trying to figure out how to protect you without starting a war that kills hundreds of people who have nothing to do with this." His voice was raw, stripped of its usual armor. "I need you to trust me." And there it was, the exact wrong thing to say. Trust me. Every man who had ever heard her had asked for that first. Trust me. It's fine. Trust me. I know what's best. Trust me. This will only hurt for a moment. Winter stepped back out of his hands. "I trusted someone once," she whispered, "for 5 years, and I have the scars to show what that cost me." Her voice steadied into something terrifyingly calm. "I won't do it again, not even for you." She walked up the stairs without looking back. Cain stood in the foyer, her words hanging around him like smoke, and for the first time in 300 years he felt something he genuinely didn't know how to fight, the possibility that he'd already lost her. He went to his study and sat in the dark for a long time. Then he called Taurus. "Find out who on the council sent Vivian," he said quietly. "All 12 seats. Their histories, their families, their debts, everything." Taurus hesitated. "My king, are we going to war?" Cain leaned back in his chair, eyes on the ceiling, Winter's face burning behind his eyes. "Not war," he said softly. "Something more precise." He paused and then made the second call, the one he thought was the right move, the strategic one, the one that would fix everything without bloodshed. He called Vivian back and agreed to a sit-down meeting with the council. Alone. Without telling Winter. He thought he was protecting her. He was wrong. Because Torres, loyal, nervous Torres, mentioned the meeting to Mrs. Chen, who had just returned from Seattle, and Mrs. Chen, with the best intentions in the world, told Winter over morning tea that the king had gone to negotiate with the council and had asked that she stay in the mansion until he returned. Winter sat very still with her teacup in both hands. "He went alone?" she asked quietly. "Yes, dear. He wanted to handle it himself." "Without telling me?" "He didn't want you to worry." Winter set the teacup down with a soft, precise click. He'd made decisions about her life without telling her. Just like Derek always had. The road to every cage she'd ever been in had been paved with men who decided what was best for her without asking. She stood up. "Mrs. Chen," she said, voice perfectly controlled, "please tell him I said thank you for everything. And goodbye." She was out the door with nothing but her phone and her dignity before Mrs. Chen could even stand up.
And just like that, the most alive Winter had felt in years walked out of the only safe place she'd ever known. Because safety that comes with silence and secrets isn't safety. It's just a prettier cage.
Kaine returned to the mansion at noon. He knew something was wrong before he opened the door. The house had a different quality of silence, the kind that sits in rooms after someone leaves and takes the warmth with them. Mrs. Chen met him in the foyer, wringing her hands, eyes red. "She's gone," she said. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know telling her would." Kaine held up one hand. His face didn't change. His voice didn't change. But something behind his eyes went completely dark. "How long ago?" 3 hours. He turned to Torres. "Find her." Torres was on the phone before the sentence finished. Kaine walked to the kitchen and stood where Winter had laughed at his waffle disaster. He stood where she'd pulled the blanket tighter and said thank you. He stood in the space she'd occupied and felt the specific weight of her absence. Then he walked to his study and sat down. And for the first time in 3 centuries, Kaine did something he almost never did. He questioned himself. He replayed everything. The meeting with Vivian, the decision to negotiate alone, the strategic thinking that had seemed so clean and logical at 2 a.m. Protect Winter by removing himself as the target, negotiate from strength, resolve it quietly, surprise her with good news when it was done.
He'd been so certain. He pressed his fingers to his temples. He had walked into the council chambers that morning and done something that had genuinely shocked 12 ancient vampires into agreement. He hadn't negotiated. He'd walked in with documentation, centuries of it. Every case the council had ignored involving human abuse in vampire-adjacent households. Every complaint filed and dismissed. Every name of every person who had suffered because the council called suffering a domestic matter. He'd laid it all on the table and told them simply and quietly that he would make every single one of those cases public. Every council member's signature on every dismissal. Unless they formally and permanently dropped all charges against Winter Ashford and issued a written decree extending full protection status to any human residing under a vampire household. They'd agreed within an hour. He'd won. He'd fixed it. And she was gone. Torres knocked. "My king, we found her." Kaine was already standing. "She's at a women's shelter on the east side of Portland, Dove House. She checked in 2 hours ago under her own name." Torres hesitated. "She's safe. She's refusing to speak to anyone." Kaine was at the door. "My king." Torres stepped carefully into his path. Perhaps you should think about how you approach this. She didn't leave because she stopped caring. She left because caring scared her, and you gave her a reason to run." He swallowed. "Going in there like a king won't bring her back." Kaine stopped, looked at Torres for a long moment. "When did you get wise?" "I've always been wise. You've never been still long enough to notice." Kaine almost smiled. Then he straightened his coat, ran a hand through his white hair, and walked out. He drove to Dove House alone. No Torres. No security. No armor.
The shelter was a converted brownstone building, warm light in the windows, a small garden out front that someone had planted with care. A human woman at the front desk looked up when he walked in and immediately recognized what he was. Her heartbeat spiked. Her hand moved toward her desk phone. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Kaine said, voice quiet. "I'm here because I made a mistake, and I need to say something to someone who probably doesn't want to hear it. Her name is Winter Ashford." The woman studied him. "She has to agree to see you. I can't force her." "I know." The woman picked up an internal phone, spoke quietly. A long pause. "Then, room 7, end of the hall," she said 5 minutes. Kaine walked down the hallway slowly, reading the framed quotes on the walls. Little handwritten cards from women who'd passed through. "I survived. I am enough. The bravest thing I ever did was leave." He stopped at one. "You didn't break. You bent, and bending kept you alive." He stood outside room 7, knocked. "Come in." Winter sat on the edge of the small bed, arms wrapped around herself, still wearing the oversized sweater from his mansion. She looked at him with those deep brown eyes that were empty again, and it hit him like a physical blow. He'd put that emptiness back. He stepped inside and closed the door, didn't move closer, gave her the room. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You don't owe me anything. You were never obligated to help me. That's not what I mean, and you know it." He stayed by the door. I went to the council this morning, alone, without telling you, and I understand exactly why that felt like every other man who ever made decisions about your life without asking. I understand why you left. He exhaled slowly. I was wrong, not in going, in the silence before it. You deserved to know. You deserved to be asked. Winter's jaw tightened. It doesn't matter what you were trying to do. The method matters. Yes, it does. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. He crossed the room slowly, set it on the bed beside her, and stepped back. The council has dropped all charges, permanently. You have full protection status. You can go anywhere, live anywhere. You don't need me, or my mansion, or my complicated existence. He paused. That's what the meeting was. Winter looked at the document. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. She read it slowly, then read it again. The silence stretched long and painful between them.
She looked at him for a long time. This ancient, brutal, complicated, tender, terrifying man standing in a women's shelter in Portland, Oregon, with his white hair and his expensive coat and his 3-century-old heart cracked open and completely visible. And she felt it again, that thing in her chest. Not fear, not desperation, something quieter and more dangerous than both. She stepped forward and pressed her forehead against his chest. Not an embrace, not forgiveness, just contact, just presence. Cain didn't move, didn't reach for her, just let her be there, exactly as she was, unmended and unrushed. You hurt me, she said into his shirt. I know. His voice was barely audible. I'm sorry. If you ever make a decision about my life without asking me again, you'll leave, and I'll deserve it, and I'll still come after you, and we'll have this exact conversation again, except I'll be more eloquent, because I'll have had time to prepare. She laughed despite herself. A wet, broken sound against his chest. His hand came up, slowly, and rested on her back, light as snow. A question, not a statement. She didn't pull away. Outside, Portland rain began to fall against the window, soft and steady, washing the streets clean. And the woman who'd stopped believing she was worth fighting for stood in the arms of the man who crossed 3 centuries and 12 council seats to prove that she was. But she wasn't ready to go back. Not yet. And that was okay. Because some things worth having are worth waiting for. And Cain, for the first time in 300 years, was genuinely, completely willing to wait.
6 weeks passed. Winter didn't go back to the mansion right away. She stayed at Dove House for 2 more weeks, and Cain respected every single day of it. He didn't show up uninvited, he didn't send Torres with messages, he didn't use his considerable power to nudge circumstances in his favor. He sent waffles. Every morning, without fail, a warm covered plate arrived at Dove House from a bakery called Tillamook Morning on the corner of Burnside Street. Always waffles. Always with a small folded note that said nothing romantic, nothing pressuring, just small things. A quote he'd read, a ridiculous observation about modern life. One note simply said, I attempted to make these myself and Mrs. Chen confiscated the kitchen. These are professionally made and considerably safer for everyone involved. Winter read every single note twice. The other women at Dove House started asking about the waffle man. He's not my boyfriend, Winter told them. Honey, said a woman named Patricia, who was 53 and had survived 20 years of her own war, a man who sends waffles every morning without asking for anything back is either deeply in love or deeply guilty. Either way, that's someone worth talking to. Winter thought about that for a long time. She got a job. That was the first thing she did entirely for herself. A small architecture firm in the Pearl District called Meridian Design was hiring a drafting assistant, and Winter had 2 years of an architecture degree from Portland State she'd abandoned when Derek told her it was taking too much of her attention away from their marriage. She walked in, showed them her portfolio, still saved on an old USB drive she'd carried in her coat pocket since the night she'd been arrested, and was hired on the spot. Her first paycheck, she bought herself a coffee at the Starbucks where Derek had proposed. She sat at the same table. She drank the whole thing. Then she walked out and never gave that corner another piece of her pain. At the end of the second week, she called Cain. He picked up on the first ring. "The waffles were a manipulation tactic," she said. "Absolutely," he replied. "Is it working?" "Maybe." A pause. "I got a job." The warmth in his voice was immediate and unguarded. "Tell me everything." She did. For 2 hours, she sat on the small bed in her room at Dove House and told him about the firm, about the project she'd been assigned, about the senior architect named Douglas who talked too fast and drew too slow and reminded her somehow of Taurus. Cain laughed at all the right moments and asked questions that proved he was actually listening, not just waiting for his turn to speak.
At the end of the call, she said, "Thank you for the notes. Which one was your favorite?" She smiled. "The one about Mrs. Chen. She did actually confiscate the kitchen. I'm not allowed near the waffle iron unsupervised anymore. It's humiliating. I've defeated council members, and apparently I cannot be trusted with a breakfast appliance." Winter laughed, and it came out easy and clean, nothing broken in it. "Cain. Yes, I'm not ready to come back yet. I know. But I'm not gone either." A pause that felt like exhaled breath. "That's everything, Winter. That's absolutely everything." She moved into her own apartment 4 days later, a small place on the east side with tall windows and a radiator that clanked in the night and a view of a maple tree that was just beginning to turn gold with the season. She painted the bedroom a deep rust color and put bookshelves on every wall and cooked her own food and slept in the middle of the bed because there was no one to push her to the edge. She learned what silence felt like when it wasn't dangerous. It felt like breathing. Cain came to see her on a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks after the shelter. He stood at her door with his white hair loose, wearing a dark coat, holding 2 cups of coffee from the place on her corner like he'd known it was there. She opened the door and looked at him for a long moment. "You found my coffee shop." "I have known about your coffee shop since day 2. I was waiting for you to invite me." She stepped aside. "Come in." He walked into her small apartment and looked around slowly, taking in the bookshelves, the rust-colored walls, the maple tree in the window, the drafting table she'd set up in the corner covered in architecture sketches. His face did something complicated and quiet. "You've built yourself a home," he said softly. "I am learning how." She took her coffee and sat on the windowsill. "How is Torres?" "Insufferably wise. It's becoming a problem." He sat on the small couch across from her. "The council has been quiet. Gregor resigned his seat. Vivian sent you a formal written apology, which I did not request and was honestly surprised by." "What did she say?" "That she underestimated you, that she was sorry for reducing your life to a negotiating point." He paused. "She's not entirely terrible, just very counsel." Winter nodded slowly. "And the 3 who died, the enforcers?" Cain met her eyes steadily. "They came to execute a tortured woman without a fair hearing." "I don't carry guilt for that." "I'm not asking you to." She looked at him over her coffee cup. "I just wanted to know if you did." "No." A pause. "Does that bother you?" She considered it honestly. "No, it doesn't. And I've thought about why, and I think it's because for the first time in my life, someone's violence was pointed away from me instead of at me." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "That changes how it feels." Cain looked at her with that expression she was learning to recognize, the one where the ancient, brutal king completely disappeared and something much more human took his place.
"I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay?" "When I walked into that execution chamber and I saw you against that wall, I told myself it was principle, that I was there about council overreach, about territory, about law." He set his coffee down. "That was a lie I told myself for approximately 4 minutes. Then you looked at me without fear, and you said I was probably a killer, and I knew." Winter's heart turned over slowly. "Knew what?" "That I hadn't been pulled to Portland by instinct or politics." His voice was quiet and completely undefended. "I was pulled there by you. I don't know how. I don't know the mechanics of it, but I have lived 300 years, and I know the difference between coincidence and something that was always going to happen." The maple tree outside the window dropped a single gold leaf against the glass. Winter looked at it. Then she looked at him. "I burned the eggs on purpose," she said. Cain blinked. "What?"
The morning you made waffles. I burned them, and you said they were asymmetrical, but I stood there watching you argue with that waffle iron for 20 minutes before I said anything, because I didn't want you to stop. She smiled, and it reached all the way to her eyes. You were so ridiculous and so real, and I hadn't seen anything real in so long. Cain stared at her. Then he laughed, that rolling thunder wrapped in silk sound that filled her small apartment and bounced off her bookshelves and settled into the walls like it belonged there. You let me suffer at the hands of a waffle iron intentionally. Magnificently so, she said, using his own word. He looked at her like he'd handed him something he hadn't known he was missing.
He crossed the room and stood in front of her at the windowsill. Slowly, giving her every chance to redirect, he reached up and tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered at her jaw, warm and careful. "Winter Ashford," he murmured. "What are we doing?" She leaned into his hand. "I think we're figuring it out. Together? Together." He kissed her then, soft and unhurried, the way someone kisses when they're not trying to claim something, but simply trying to say, "I see you, and I'm here, and I'm not leaving." Winter's hands came up and held his face, her scarred wrists against his jaw, and she kissed him back with everything she'd been quietly collecting since the morning he argued with a waffle iron and accidentally made her feel human again. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you are the bravest person I have met in 3 centuries, and I have met extraordinary people. I'm just someone who survived," she whispered. "No." He pulled back enough to look at her, eyes clear and certain. "Surviving is the floor. You're building above it. There's a difference." She smiled, and it was whole. Not broken at the edges, not held together by willpower, just whole. Outside, Portland's autumn pressed gold hands against every window, and somewhere across the city, 12 council members were quietly remembering why the king's name was spoken carefully, and Torres was probably being wise about something, and Mrs. Chen was guarding a waffle iron, and a small women's shelter on the east side had a new regular waffle delivery going to 3 women who were also learning what silence felt like when it wasn't dangerous. And Winter Ashford, who had walked into an execution chamber with empty eyes and walked out in the arms of something ancient and unexpected, sat in the home she'd built herself and let herself be loved by someone who'd spent 3 centuries learning what he'd done wrong and was finally, furiously, tenderly, getting it right.
The scars on her wrists didn't disappear, but she stopped hiding them. And Cain, every single time he held her hands, pressed his lips to every one of them. Not to erase them, but to show her that every mark she'd survived was proof of a strength she'd always had, even when she couldn't see it herself. That was the lesson neither of them expected, that sometimes the person who saves you isn't the one who shows up first. It's the one who shows up honest and stays. The lesson this story carries: survival is not the destination. It is the beginning. The real work is learning to live beyond the thing that nearly broke you, and you do not have to do that work alone. The right person will not rush your healing. They will bring waffles and wait. You watched Winter walk into that execution chamber with nothing left in her eyes, and you stayed until she smiled for real. That means you have a heart that recognizes something true when it sees it. Do not let that heart watch alone. Hit that subscribe button right now and join this Vampire Love Stories community, where every single story is crafted to make you feel something real. You are not just a viewer here. You are family, and we protect our family, just like Cain does. Drop your location in the comments right now. Tell me where in the world you are watching from, because I genuinely want to know where my story family is spread across this earth. And one last thing. What moment in this story made your heart completely stop? Tell me below. I read every single one. And listen, if you thought this story was something, the next one on your screen right now is darker, more twisted, more romantic, and the ending will absolutely destroy you in the best possible way. Click that image showing on your screen right now, and let's go. I will see you there.